Hi, I'm Jake Pickles. As was just announced, I'm from England. I've worked predominantly in the south of the country, in clubs all along the south coast and in London. I've been trying to develop football players for the last decade. And what I want to do today is just take you along my journey. I first and foremost are a coach just like all of you. I'm a developer. I'm not an academic. Just like Sandhu, I look at the research and I try and make sense of it. A couple of years ago, me and Aslan, who you met earlier, set up a blog to try and bridge that gap between academia and coaches. It's what we would have wanted when we were starting out. So hopefully through looking at my journey and listening to my journey, you'll be able to pick something up along the way. That's the plan. So to start, these are the things we're going to talk about. First and foremost, we're going to talk about technique, the perception of it. Where I come from, I'm sure you can share some of those thoughts as well. And you've seen things like this in your own country. And then we'll move on to how to develop creative and skillful players. So, firstly, I'd like you just to turn to the person next to you and give you a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, just to have a quick conversation about what you think technique is. And then if anyone feels comfortable after, we could get the microphone out maybe and see if anyone wants to share what they think that is. So 2 minutes, what do you think is technique? What is technique in football? The ability to make a decision with the ball. Brilliant. Anyone else? Might be similar, might be slightly different. We've got another one there, Flav.
Controlling the ball to achieve an objective.
Controlling the ball to achieve an objective. Really good. Okay, so what how I've contextualized it, and looking through the dictionary as well to help me out, a way of carrying out a particular task. A way of carrying out a particular task. So we're going to talk about that and then come back to it. This here is an example. Caitlin Clark, she plays in the women's NBA. Considered probably the best women's NBA player. Only in her first season. She was #1 draft pick last year. And she joined the bottom team in the league. She's on course to be the first WNBA player to average over 16 points and 7 assists in the league's history. So a very good player. What's happened recently is, despite her success and despite her talent, there's been criticism of her technique, and I just want to walk through that and then talk about it. So this is what a pundit said about Caitlin halfway through the season. The amount of work it takes to be consistent through her mechanical flaw is really impressive. So he suggests there's a mechanical flaw. In a perfect world, she would hold the ball to the right side of her head and the coaches would fix that. So if you look at this picture now, and we'll zoom in so you can actually see it a bit better in a second, she's holding the ball to the left side of her head. I want you to think about why that might be. Funnily enough, she sinks this three-pointer shot, and you can go and watch her do that regularly. Every week. If you have a look, the reason why she might be moving that ball to the side is because she's got pressure from the right-hand side. Because she's dominantly right-handed, obviously top-level defenders are going to try and stop her from shooting. It doesn't stop her. She's a very good player. Okay? So this is what I like to call the technique delusion. This is something I've seen throughout academies in my country. The idea that there's one perfect technique. There's one perfect technique we're trying to achieve for every technique we believe is in football. We try and repeat drills. We try and repeat these drills to repeat the technique, hoping that they'll become consistent within this technique. And then we try and correct. If they step slightly out of line, their knee comes out, they don't strike the ball the way we want them to, then we correct that. And then we expect them to put that in the performance environment. I think for me, the problem that I've seen and where this stems from is efficiency. the word efficiency, not to be confused with effectiveness. So being effective and being efficient for me are completely different things. They can exist simultaneously together, but efficiency for me kills creativity. The idea of a 90-minute football game, if you're talking about the top level in the men's game and the women's game, to score as quick as you can in 90 minutes doesn't make sense to me. You can score in any of those minutes. You can take as long as you need to. You can take as many touches as you want. Efficiency is not the answer for me. So here's a little practice, just a basic practice. 2 balls in play, playing around mannequins, receiving the ball, playing. So if we look into what this looks like for us and for the players, what are they practicing? They're practicing efficiency. One particular technique, one perfect technique. Receive like this, maybe off the back foot. You hear that quite often. Receive off the back foot, play round. It's all about speed and tempo. Simplistic tasks that I don't believe represent the game. You're never going to get this opportunity in a match unless maybe the opposition team have dropped really deep and you're just passing it to your right back. The goalkeeper's passing it out. But does that help us win the game? I don't think so. So we're looking for error-free practice within this. So we correct if there's an error. And then it also comes down to aesthetics. Does the ball sound nice and look nice when it slides across the grass? What I want you guys to think about, and what I've been thinking about for the last decade, is that necessary to play a good pass? Is it necessary to slide a ball on the floor with good technique? The players, what happens to the players within this? They rely on instruction. They wait for you to correct them. That's their feedback. I believe it limits imagination. If you're told to pass and receive and dribble and do whatever in a certain way and shoot in a certain way, you're limited to the level of the coach. That's a problem for me because a lot of these players I work with are much better than I've ever been. Okay, so I can't do that to them. It limits adaptability, their ability to look at a situation and adapt to it and try and win the game. Limits awareness. They're just looking for the technique that you've put into practice as opposed to what's actually going on in the game. They're not attuned to what's going on in the match. And therefore it limits skill. We limit their skill by putting these constraints on them. So what is technique? It's a way of carrying out a particular task. It's not the way. That's the key difference. It's a way. And there's some techniques that we've never seen yet. So if we practice all these techniques that we think we know of, it's only because we've already seen them. But what about the ones we haven't seen yet? And that's the players I want to develop. I want to show the world, and for my country, I want to show the world that the players where I live are fantastic and creative and can come up with things we've never seen before. That's what inspired me when I was younger. So, one particular technique, have a look at some of these. Some of my favorite techniques and my favorite passes, some of my favorite touches, goals, things that inspired me when I was younger. If we're going to practice in this limited way, where's the time for this? Let's have a look at some of these. You'll recognize some. Okay, so there is not one technique. And if you think about the ways that we coach them, and that we've all been guilty of, I'm sure, I know I have, Ozil never makes that pass. Never does something like that. Okay? This is what we're looking for, something we've never seen before. So what are we looking for? I think we're looking for skill. I think we're looking for adaptability. So what is skill? The ability to perform a task in a variety of ways. And adaptability, the ability to adjust to different conditions. And if we put these two together, I think we can create skillful and creative players. So how do we actually do this? This is the question. I can't tell you, like I said, I'm not an academic, but what I can do is share my journey and my curiosity that is still going now. I'm still on my journey. I don't know everything. Absolutely far from it. There's people in the room much smarter than me. And this is where it's led me. My curiosity has led me to these theories, and this is what I try and inform my practices on. So to start with, the games approach. Rick talked about this earlier with the 4v4 stuff. This is where I started. I used to hate I used to hate standing around in drills waiting to play football. When can I play football? When can I actually play the game? Arsene Wenger, a little quote from him, "Park football has disappeared. The game itself is a good coach. Why? Because I have to make decisions." Maybe today we're over-coaching a little bit and we lose that freedom, that creativity, that individuality. So, what might a games approach look like? I'm going to do this for each theory and show you how they slightly change under each theory. So the games approach, with this one, it might be play the ball from one side of the pitch to the other, and then you can score, and that gives you 3 points. Sounds good. Sounds good because they get to make decisions. They don't have to use that player out there. I've seen conditioning in little games like this where you say, you must play from one side to the other before you can score. But that's not real. You're forcing them then to do what you want them to do. Okay? This is great because there's more decisions to make. They don't have to go wide. They can still score more normal goals. This is sort of where I started. But what I would say is, am I still conditioning the players? Am I still conditioning the players by putting a rule in like this? And this was my problem, and this is why I searched for something else. Because I think we are. By suggesting that you can play from one side to the other and then score to get more points, I'm suggesting that that is a good thing to do. But there is no good thing. It's just about winning the game. There is not one specific thing that I should be conditioning these players to do. So I'm still conditioning them. So the preconception that that is good makes them look for that in the game. But there might be other options that arise in the game. And this is where the problem lies. So I ask myself, and I do this all the time, I try to, are they learning the game or are they looking for approval from me? So when I started looking at other theories other than the games approach, that's what I was looking for, is them really learning in the game, and for me, as the coach, to become completely obsolete. I want to stand on the sideline and watch these players skillfully adapt and look for make decisions to win the game. So we're going to move on to the constraints-led approach, something you've heard about already. I'm going to go into a tiny bit more detail, but I don't want it to be overwhelming, so I've tried to simplify it. There's a lot of stuff I'm leaving out, but I think this could help a lot of coaches who are looking to get into something like this. So what are we looking for? We're looking for repetition without repetition. This has been mentioned before by a couple of the guys that have already spoken. The repetition of searching for a solution. So repetition is important for learning, I do believe that, but repeating the technique, I don't think helps, but repeating the search for a solution is key. You're helping them explore constantly. Can they explore this problem constantly? And to do that, you can change the task. So like the one I just showed you, you can change the task that you put into the games. You can change the environment, maybe the pitch size, maybe the footwear they're wearing, maybe the ground. Are they playing on concrete? Are they playing futsal like we saw earlier? What are they doing with what's the environment do for them? And then individually, you can constrain the individual, you can put boundaries on the individual to push them into a place maybe they haven't been before. Okay? This is Pavel Datsyuk, probably butchered the name there. However, he is a Russian hockey player. He's considered one of the best puck handlers to ever existed, and he had a really unique style of gameplay, really creative player. And he had this to say about his environment when he was growing up. In Russia, we only had one puck. I learned to keep it for as long as I could. So just think about what that would do to him as he's growing up. Times were hard. I feared breaking my stick, so I rarely shot. And if you watch him score goals in hockey, he has this really unique way of lifting the puck up on his stick, going to flick it in the goal, and then quickly changing it and flicking it in the other direction. And he scored lots of goals from doing it. He also, because he didn't want to break his stick, because he didn't grow up very wealthy, he would manipulate his stick as he was we call it dribbling, but as he was puck handling, so he wouldn't break it. So not only was he was giving himself variation by sort of manipulating the stick in an unorthodox way. Now, if he had come into the approach we sometimes take in football, we would have killed that, and he wouldn't have been the player that people know of him today. And lastly, I only had figure skates, so I was light on my feet. If you've ever seen hockey skates, they're big, bulky, built for speed, but he had figure skates. That's all he could afford, that's all he could find. So all these things were here at his environment, and they affected the player he was. So what we want to look at is using, setting boundaries for the task, the environment, and the individual, just like that example I just gave. And we can do that in practice to help develop some of the players to reach their full potential and become the unique players they probably should be. So how do we do that? We've heard about Mark O'Sullivan already. He created this representative design. And it starts with a ball. You need direction, real direction. Are you defending something? Are you attacking something? I think if you've got 4 goals to defend, sometimes we do things like that. What's your position going to be when you're defending those goals, trying to defend all those goals? Is it realistic? That's the sort of thing we're looking at. Whereas if you've got a place to defend and a place to attack, whether that's goals, a line, end zone, whatever, the positions you take up, you're going to self-organize around that task, and it's going to be realistic to the game. Consequence, if you lose the ball, what happens? Do you get a point scored against you? Do you get a goal scored against you? Does the other team win? Things like that. Opposition, obviously really key there. So if I was, if you've never done anything like this before, these are the things I would use to create my sessions. These are the things I would start using to create my sessions. So the constraint-set approach, similar game. So it's the same kind of game. And I've highlighted the red area here, just to that wouldn't be highlighted in the game, but just to highlight the practice. So the rule here is when the ball is in one vertical third, so maybe it's down here, the defenders can't defend in the opposite vertical third. So just think about what that would do, what that would highlight in this game for the attackers. For me, it highlights an opportunity to play around or play over into this area. So the idea of the constraint-set approach is you are highlighting parts of the game that may come up and then asking them to solve that in any way they wish. Okay, and the better you know your players, the more constraints you can put on and the more you can push them out of their comfort zone. So it is allowing players to explore. It is highlighting an area of the game. There's a couple of problems here that I've bumped into. And one is, by the time I get players at 13 and 14 in the English Academy system, they've already been conditioned to think and play a certain way. So they might have had 6 or 7 years of just going, right, I'm going to pass that round the back. And anyone who watched England in the Euros, you would have seen that firsthand. Passing that ball around the back, side to side, okay? So there are times where I don't want to go in and give direct feedback, but there are times where I have to condition against the conditioning that has already been put upon these players. And again, are they learning the game or are they looking for approval? They're learning the game more than the previous one, I would say. Something is more highlighted, but are they still looking for the approval of me as the coach? What are the players thinking I want them to do in this? They're thinking I want them to play it out there. Again, that's a problem for me. I don't want them to do what they think I want. I want them to find their own way. So, constraint-set approach is fantastic. It's a good gateway into developing good sessions. I still use it heavily. I still use a lot of the things in here. My issue in academy football is there's prior conditioning to the players I get at a certain time, and I have 1 year with them. So that's a problem. So I was looking for a way, at this point in my career, I'm looking for a way to not have to anti-condition them, not have to condition them against the conditioning. And I come across some work by Dr. Scholhorn, who is actually in the back there. He's in the room with you. So if you get a chance, go and chat to him. He created something called differential learning. And the way I've tried to simplify this, very hard to simplify it into one sentence, but I've tried my best. Practicing a skill in a variety of ways to increase variability and promote adaptability. So this is now where I'm at, and I've been learning it for just over a year, and I'm trying to work with it currently. So the idea is you still set boundaries. We call them boundaries in differential learning as opposed to what you might have heard before, which are constraints. Boundaries in the task, the environment, and the individual. And the reason we call them boundaries is because it's a nicer word for increasing and decreasing that boundary, okay? So we're looking for this, but not only are we doing a similar thing, we're also adding constant variation. That's the key difference, and I'll explain why now. So this is the same practice, but with a few differential learning ways to use differential learning. So the idea is to constantly change the task, the environment, and the individual boundaries. Here you can see it looks complicated, but you can do this in a way where you build it up from the bottom. Hopefully I'll get to show you this, and you guys will be around later on. I'll get to show you what this actually looks like in practice. Here for me, there's 3 pitches. So you've got the full pitch, as we did before. You've got the hexagonal one with the red lines. And then something else I might do is say, you've only got this side here, so all the players in there, or all the players in the central and left, or all the players in the central and right. And what I'll do is I'll constantly change this boundary. So every minute or few minutes, I'll look at the player, I'll observe the players. If they're struggling, I won't change it as quick. But if they're getting through it and finding unique solutions, I'll change that boundary. And I'll say, right, now you're playing on this pitch. Now you're playing on this pitch. And the idea is to keep them in a constant state of problem solving. Now they're not looking for approval from me. They're just in it trying to solve the problem. Okay? So the skill of the coach here, and you're going to probably get a talk about this in a lot more detail tomorrow from Aslan, is to observe and then decide, do they need more variation or do they need less? So this is one example of something you can do. You can do a million other things. You can let your creativity run wild. Yeah, so are they learning the game or are they searching for approval? Again, there are some problems with conditioning against prior conditioning. There's nothing I can do about that, but I have found by using this approach that I have to do it much, much less. I rarely have to give feedback because they're constantly trying to solve different tasks and problems. Positional play is another issue because you're trying to develop players to see and identify space, but also to create spaces that don't yet exist. And positional play, in my opinion, doesn't offer that. It doesn't offer that outside of the system. There might be some of it put into the system. And you think about, so I was very fortunate enough to see De Zerbi work, but he had a very specific way of playing. And he wouldn't budge from that. But there were 3 ways in each scenario he could think of for the players to get out. But I went and watched them against Everton at home. And Sean Dyche, the manager, just sat the players on the players they were trying to play to, those 2 pivots, and did not let them get the ball no matter what. And they won 5-1. So the problem with positional players, it forces them into a system, I think, you don't get a true representation of what that player can achieve, what they can see, and how they're going to make decisions based around that. We're nearly at the end now, but just some sort of conversations I was having with myself while I was in each approach. When I was in the games approach, predominantly, I was always opposed versus isolated practice. And we've heard a lot of that today. I'm still kind of in there, but there's some stuff in differential learning where I think you can do unopposed practice in a specific way. We're not going to go into that today. So opposed versus isolated practice. Then when I started learning more about the constraints-led approach, it became representative design, like the Mark O'Sullivan thing, versus non-representative. So that's how I was building my sessions. And now it's that mixed with constant variation or limited variation? What do I need to do to make sure they're in a constant state of process and learning? So that's the current approach that I use today. Intentional practice, highlight parts of the games for your players to search for functional solutions. So I'm still highlighting parts of the game, but using constant variability to increase what Mr. Showan calls the noise or the boundaries of the practice to